I spent 2 years saving for my dream wedding venue, only for my own mother to steal it from my golden child sister. She thought she'd won, laughing in my face. But she didn't realize the landlord despised entitled brats, and his revenge was more ruthless than I ever planned. If you grew up as the invisible daughter, you already know the exact tone my mother used whenever she said my sister's name, Audrey. It always sounded like a sigh of relief, a little musical note of pure pride. I, on the other hand, was just Hannah. Hannah the reliable, Hannah the sensible, Hannah the one who paid for her own college textbooks, while Audrey got a brand new car for simply existing and maintaining a C average. My mother, Cynthia Robinson, made no secret of her favoritism. In her eyes, Audrey was destined for greatness, which in my mother's deeply traditional, status-obsessed mind meant marrying wealth and looking flawless in family Christmas cards. I learned early on to step back, build my own life, and expect absolutely nothing from them. That independence served me well when I met Brendan Hayes. Brendan was everything my family wasn't: grounded, fiercely loyal, and completely unimpressed by superficial nonsense. We built a beautiful, quiet life together. I worked as a physical therapist, and he was an architectural draftsperson. We didn't have a trust fund, but we had a joint savings account that we painstakingly contributed to every single month for 3 years so we could afford the wedding of our dreams. And that dream had a name: the Pendleton Estate. Located in the lush, rolling hills just outside of the city, the Pendleton Estate wasn't your typical wedding factory. You couldn't just throw money at the owner and book a date. The property was a historic, sprawling 19th century manor boasting an immaculate, cast-iron glass conservatory where the ceremonies were held. It was owned by Mr. Arthur Pendleton, an eccentric, old-money widower in his late 70s who only rented the venue out 12 times a year. He was notoriously strict. He interviewed every single couple personally. If he felt you were treating his beloved family home like a cheap Instagram backdrop, he'd show you the door. Brendan and I were nervous wrecks when we sat in Mr. Pendleton's mahogany-paneled library, sipping Earl Grey tea. But the moment Brendan noticed the original crown molding and started discussing 19th century masonry techniques, Mr. Pendleton's stern face softened. By the end of the 2-hour conversation, he was showing us photos of his late wife, Martha, and telling us how she used to grow orchids in the conservatory. "You two have quiet hearts," Mr. Pendleton told us, tapping his cane on the floor. "I like that. Martha would have liked that. The estate is yours for the first Saturday in May." We signed the contract that very afternoon. We wired the $15,000 non-refundable deposit, nearly every dime of our wedding savings, directly into the estate's account. I walked out to the car and cried happy tears. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something entirely my own, something truly special that couldn't be overshadowed. I should have known better. 2 months after we secured the Pendleton estate, Audrey got engaged. Her fiancé was Greg Morrison, a tech developer whose parents owned half the real estate in our county. Greg was loud, flashy, and constantly bragging about his stock portfolio. My mother was absolutely euphoric. Suddenly, the entire Robinson family text thread was flooded with diamond ring emojis and caps lock screaming. Almost immediately, the Audrey wedding machine powered up. There was only one problem. Audrey is impatient, and the Morrison family is demanding. They didn't want a long engagement. They wanted a lavish, high-society wedding in exactly 6 months. In the wedding industry, booking a luxury venue with only 6 months' notice is practically impossible. Audrey spent weeks dragging my mother to every country club, hotel, and resort within a 50-mile radius. Everything was booked solid. The venues that did have openings weren't grand enough for the Morrison family's standards. I kept my head down, quietly planning my own details, refusing to engage in the growing panic at my mother's house. But a predator always finds its prey eventually. And my mother had just remembered that I was sitting on the most exclusive, highly coveted piece of real estate in the county. The trap was set on a gloomy Sunday afternoon. Cynthia had invited Brendan and me over for a family dinner. I should have recognized the red flags when I walked in, and saw Audrey already crying at the kitchen island, dabbing at her perfectly winged eyeliner with a tissue, while Greg stood behind her, massaging her shoulders with a look of deep, theatrical distress. "What's going on?" I asked cautiously, taking off my coat. "It's a disaster, Hannah," my mother sighed, pouring a generous glass of Chardonnay. Audrey is devastated. Greg's parents are flying in 50 of their most important business associates from London, and there is absolutely nowhere to host them. The country club is booked. The botanical gardens are booked. I'm sorry to hear that, Brendan said politely. Maybe push the date back to next year? Audrey gasped as if Brendan had just suggested she wear a trash bag down the aisle. I am not waiting a year. Greg's grandmother is 88. She needs to see this. Plus, I already bought my dress. It's a spring collection. It has to be a spring wedding. My mother set her wine glass down, her eyes locking onto mine with the precise, calculated focus of a sniper. Actually, Hannah, there is a solution. A perfect one. And it would be such a beautiful gift to your sister. The air in the room went freezing cold. I looked at my mother, then at Audrey, whose fake tears had instantly vanished, replaced by a hungry, expectant stare. No, I said instantly. You don't even know what I'm going to ask, my mother snapped. You want my venue. You want the Pendleton estate. The answer is absolutely, unequivocally no. My mother crossed her arms. Hannah, be reasonable. You and Brendan are having a small, intimate thing. You're inviting what, 80 people? The Pendleton can hold 200. It's a waste of space for your little gathering. You could easily have your reception at that nice Italian restaurant downtown. I'll even pay for the meatballs. Brendan stepped forward, his jaw tight. Cynthia, we paid a $15,000 deposit. We went through a rigorous interview process with the owner. It is our venue. Oh, please, Greg scoffed, finally speaking up. I'll write you a check for the 15 grand right now. I'll make it 20 for your trouble. We need the space, man. My parents are expecting top-tier luxury, not some run-down banquet hall. Audrey deserves the best. And I don't? I asked, my voice shaking. I've saved for years for this. Audrey hasn't lifted a finger. Don't be selfish, Hannah, my mother yelled, dropping the sweet facade entirely. Audrey is marrying into the Morrison family. Do you understand what that means for us? The connections? The prestige? Your wedding is sweet, but let's be honest. It's not a society event. You don't need a glass conservatory. Audrey needs this to secure her place in Greg's family. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a heavy, dark realization settle in my chest. She wasn't asking. She felt entitled to it. In her mind, everything I had belonged to Audrey by default. Keep your money, Greg, I said, grabbing my coat. The contract is in my name. The wedding is in May. If you want a nice venue, Audrey, you should have started looking 2 years ago like I did. Come on, Brendan. We're leaving. As I walked out the door, my mother screamed after me. You are ruining your sister's life. If you don't hand over that venue, you are no longer a part of this family. Promise? I yelled back, slamming the door behind me. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had drawn a boundary, and that, despite their tantrums, they had no choice but to accept it. I severely underestimated Cynthia Robinson's capacity for deception. A week later, I was at work, helping a patient with knee stretches, when my Apple Watch buzzed violently. It was a rapid succession of texts from Brendan. Call me right now. Hannah, drop what you're doing and call me. Something is wrong with Pendleton. I excused myself to the break room, my heart hammering against my ribs, and dialed his number. What happened? I breathed. I just got off the phone with Mr. Pendleton's estate manager, Brendan said, his voice deadly calm, masking a quiet fury. She was calling to confirm the new catering truck dimensions for Audrey and Greg's reception. Hannah, your mother forged your signature. What? I gripped the edge of the break room counter, the room spinning. Your mother sent an email to the estate, Brendan explained. She set up a fake email address looking like it belonged to you. She filled out a formal transfer of contract request, forging your digital signature, claiming you had a sudden medical emergency and couldn't get married, but that your sister would be taking over the date, so the deposit wouldn't go to waste. She even paid the transfer fee. I felt physically sick. The sheer audacity, the criminal level of manipulation. My mother had actually stolen my identity to steal my wedding venue. Did they approve it? I choked out, terrified that my dream was already gone. They processed the paperwork yesterday, Brendan said grimly. Legally, on their books, the first Saturday in May now belongs to Audrey Robinson and Greg Morrison. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded my veins. My mother thought she had outsmarted me. She thought I would just lie down and take it to avoid a legal battle with my own family. But she made one catastrophic miscalculation. She had never met Mr. Arthur Pendleton. "Brendan," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "Get the car. We are going to the estate right now." The drive to the Pendleton estate was a blur of hyperventilation and a heavy, suffocating silence. Brendan's knuckles were stark white as he gripped the steering wheel, his jaw locked in a hard line. I stared out the passenger window, watching the city buildings melt away into the lush, sprawling green of the countryside, feeling like my entire reality had been fractured. Identity theft. My own mother. The woman who had brushed my hair when I was a little girl had coldly calculated a way to digitally erase me, feigning a medical emergency, just so Audrey could have a glass conservatory to impress a family of tech millionaires. When we pulled through the massive wrought iron gates of the estate, my stomach plummeted. The gravel crunched loudly beneath our tires, announcing our arrival to the sprawling 19th century manor. We didn't even wait for the engine to fully shut off before we were out of the car and marching up the limestone steps. I pounded on the heavy oak door. A moment later, Abigail Preston, Mr. Pendleton's stern but usually warm estate manager, opened it. She was holding a clipboard, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. When she saw me, all the color drained from her face. "Hannah?" Abigail gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She looked at me as if I were a ghost, her eyes darting up and down my perfectly healthy frame. "What on earth are you doing here?" "Your mother. The email said you were in the ICU with a ruptured appendix. We were told you were going into emergency surgery." A ruptured appendix. I actually let out a dark, breathless laugh. Cynthia hadn't just made up a vague illness. She had crafted a full-blown medical crisis to guarantee the estate wouldn't ask too many questions. "My appendix is perfectly fine, Abigail," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I never sent you an email. I never authorized a transfer. My mother forged my digital signature and created a fake email address to steal my wedding date for my sister." Abigail's mouth opened and closed silently before she stepped aside, her demeanor instantly shifting from shocked to strictly professional. "You both need to come with me. Right now. Mr. Pendleton is in the library." We followed her down the grand hallway, our footsteps echoing off the marble floors. When Abigail opened the heavy mahogany doors to the library, Mr. Arthur Pendleton was sitting in his usual wingback chair, nursing a cup of black tea. He looked up, his sharp blue eyes narrowing instantly as he took in my presence. Abigail didn't mince words. "Sir, it appears we have been the victims of a severe fraud." For the next 20 minutes, Brendan and I sat on the leather sofa and laid everything out. I showed Mr. Pendleton my driver's license. I showed him the time-stamped emails from my actual account. I played him a saved voicemail from my mother from 3 days prior, perfectly highlighting her healthy, demanding tone, completely devoid of any motherly panic over a supposedly hospitalized daughter. As I spoke, I watched the temperature in the room plummet. Arthur Pendleton was a man of old-school honor. He despised the shallow, the boastful, and the dishonest. As a wealthy landowner, he had spent his entire life fending off entitled people who thought their money meant they could bend the world to their will. When I finished, silence hung heavily in the air, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Arthur set his teacup down with a sharp clink against the saucer. "I have been fielding calls from your sister and her entourage for the past 48 hours, Arthur began, his voice dangerously quiet. "She informed my staff that the historic koi pond was depressing and requested it be drained so she could install a plexiglass dance floor. She also asked if we could paint the cast-iron framework of Martha's conservatory white because the original 19th century black metal didn't fit her winter wonderland theme." Brendan winced. "Mr. Pendleton, I am so sorry." "Do not apologize for the sins of a thief, young man," Arthur interrupted, raising a hand. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the silver head of his cane. "I was already drafting an email to terminate their contract due to their grotesque disrespect for this property. But this? Forgery? Identity theft? Using my late wife's home as a pawn in some pathetic, social climbing game?" He looked at me, and for a moment, the stern landlord melted away, leaving a fiercely protective grandfatherly figure. "Hannah, I am deeply sorry your family has done this to you. You and Brendan are exactly the kind of people I want married on these grounds. Your contract is still valid. As far as I'm concerned, you never relinquished it." "Thank you," I choked out, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. Can we just, can you just email them and tell them the transfer is void? A slow, terrifying smile spread across Arthur's weathered face. It was the smile of a predator who had just caught the scent of blood. Oh, my dear, we could send an email, Arthur said smoothly, his eyes glittering with a sudden dark amusement. But where is the justice in that? Your mother committed a felony to steal from you. She believes she has won. She believes she can treat you as collateral damage and walk away to clink champagne glasses with her new wealthy friends. Arthur stood up, leaning on his cane. Next Tuesday, Audrey, her fiancé, your mother, and the boys' parents are scheduled to come here for what they called a VIP design walkthrough. They want to parade around the estate and flaunt their supposed new venue. I say, we let them come. Brendan looked at Arthur, a slow smirk forming on his face as he realized what the older man was suggesting. You want to confront them in person. I do not tolerate liars on my property, Arthur declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. And I certainly do not tolerate the abuse of the people I have invited into my home. You two will be here next Tuesday, and you will watch as I tear down the little castle of lies your mother has built. The following Tuesday was a bright, crisp afternoon. The kind of day that makes the sprawling gardens of the Pendleton estate look like something out of a Renaissance painting. Brendan and I arrived an hour early. Abigail snuck us up the servants' stairs to the second-floor gallery. The gallery had a wraparound balcony that overlooked the grand foyer and the entrance to the glass conservatory. We were perfectly hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains, but we had a front-row seat to the impending execution. At exactly 2 p.m., the heavy oak doors opened. I heard my mother's voice before I saw her. It was that high-pitched, affected tone she only used when she was trying to sound wealthy. Oh, Pamela, wait until you see the light in here, Cynthia practically cooed as she walked into the foyer. She was dressed in a pristine white pantsuit, looking every bit the triumphant mother of the bride. Audrey followed close behind, clinging to Greg's arm. She was already pointing at things, dictating changes to an exhausted-looking wedding planner trailing behind them. Finally, Greg's parents Richard and Pamela Morrison walked in. They looked exactly as you'd expect, dripping in designer labels, scanning the historic molding with a look of mild, practiced condescension. It's quaint, Pamela Morrison noted, adjusting her silk scarf. A bit rustic, but with the right floral budget, we can mask the smell of old wood. Greg, darling, did you ensure they have enough valet space for the Bentley Club? Handled, Mom, Greg bragged loudly. I slipped the manager an extra grand to keep the peasant cars parked out back. I felt Brendan's hand squeeze my shoulder in the dark. We watched as the group moved toward the entrance of the conservatory. That was when the library doors opened, and Mr. Arthur Pendleton stepped out. He wasn't alone. Flanking him was a tall man in a sharp gray suit holding a leather briefcase, whom I would later learn was Arthur's private attorney, Mr. Donovan and, to my absolute shock, two uniformed police officers who had been waiting quietly in the parlor. The swagger instantly vanished from Greg's posture. Pamela Morrison stopped mid-sentence, her eyes darting to the police officers. "Ah, Mr. Pendleton," my mother chimed, trying to quickly recover her footing. She plastered on a fake, blinding smile and stepped forward, extending a hand. "I'm Cynthia Robinson, Audrey's mother. We spoke via email regarding the transfer. These are the Morrisons." Arthur did not take her hand. He didn't even look at it. He stood perfectly still, his cane resting in front of him, surveying the group like a judge looking at the guilty. "Mrs. Robinson," Arthur said, his voice echoing off the marble floors, loud and crystal clear. "I am well aware of who you are, and I am well aware of the emails." My mother's smile faltered slightly, sensing the immediate hostility. "Well, yes, we're just thrilled to be here. We have some big plans to modernize the space. You will not be touching a single blade of grass on my property," Arthur cut her off, his voice cracking like a whip. The silence that followed was deafening. Audrey physically recoiled, and Greg stepped forward, puffing his chest out. "Excuse me, pal? We paid the deposit. We paid the transfer fee. We have a contract." Arthur turned his piercing gaze to Greg. You have a forged piece of garbage, Mr. Morrison. Nothing more." Arthur gestured to his lawyer, Mr. Donovan, who stepped forward and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. "On Thursday of last week, Arthur addressed the entire room. Though his eyes were locked on my mother, I received a digital transfer request from an email address claiming to belong to Hannah Robinson. The email stated she was in the ICU with a ruptured appendix and authorized the transfer of her $15,000 deposit and her wedding date to her sister, Audrey. Pamela Morrison gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She turned to look at my mother. Cynthia, what is he talking about? You told us Hannah amicably stepped aside because her wedding was too small. My mother's face was rapidly draining of blood. She looked like she was going to faint. I don't know what he's talking about. There must be some misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Arthur boomed, pointing a trembling, furious finger at my mother. Hannah Robinson was never in the hospital. I sat with her in my library yesterday afternoon. You stole her digital identity. You forged her signature on a legally binding contract. You lied about a medical emergency to steal her venue, simply because you believed your other daughter was more deserving. Up in the gallery, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I had dreamed of standing up to my mother my entire life, but watching Arthur Pendleton meticulously destroy her facade in front of the very people she was trying to impress was a level of vindication I couldn't have imagined. This is absurd, Greg yelled, his face flushing dark red. Look, old man, I don't care about the family drama. If the other sister wants money, I'll pay her out. Just name the price. We need this venue. Arthur looked at Greg with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. Your arrogance is astounding, Mr. Morrison. Do you truly believe your bank account shields you from the consequences of fraud? I wouldn't let you marry on my property if you offered me the moon. Arthur turned to the police officers. Officers, the woman in the white suit is Cynthia Robinson. Mr. Donovan has compiled the IP address logs, the forged documents, and the wire transfer records for the fraudulent fee she paid. I am officially pressing charges for wire fraud and trespassing. I want them removed from my estate immediately. Chaos erupted. Audrey burst into loud, ugly sobs, stamping her foot on the marble floor. Greg started screaming at the lawyer, threatening to sue the estate for breach of contract, while the police officers calmly but firmly stepped forward to separate the group. But the most satisfying reaction came from the Morrisons. Richard Morrison, a man whose entire life was built on public image and corporate reputation, looked at Cynthia as if she were a piece of trash stuck to his shoe. You forged legal documents? Richard hissed at my mother, his voice vibrating with rage. You dragged our family, our name, into a criminal investigation for a wedding venue? Richard, please. It was just a little white lie to expedite the process, Cynthia babbled, tears ruining her makeup as an officer asked her for her ID. We are leaving, Pamela Morrison declared, grabbing her Hermes bag and turning on her heel. She didn't even look at Audrey. Greg, get in the car. This wedding is suspended indefinitely. We will not be associated with common criminals. Mom, wait! Greg chased after his parents, completely abandoning Audrey, who was left wailing in the foyer as the police escorted my mother out the front doors. Brendan and I stayed hidden until the very last car drove out of the gates. When we finally came downstairs, Arthur was sitting on a bench in the conservatory, gently misting a row of purple orchids. He looked up, giving us a gentle, tired smile. The space is yours, Hannah, he said quietly, as it always was. The fallout was catastrophic for my family, but entirely of their own making. Cynthia was formally charged with identity theft and wire fraud. Because she had used electronic banking across state lines to pay the fraudulent transfer fee, it escalated the severity of the charges. To avoid jail time, she had to drain her own savings to pay exorbitant legal fees and accept a plea deal that involved hundreds of hours of community service. The Morrisons, terrified of the public scandal, forced Greg to call off the engagement entirely. Audrey, stripped of her golden ticket and her lavish wedding, blamed my mother for the entire debacle. The two of them had a massive falling out and didn't speak for a year. As for me, I blocked their numbers. I didn't visit my mother. I didn't offer my sister a shoulder to cry on. I finally let go of the invisible daughter syndrome and embraced the family I was building with Brendan. On the first Saturday in May, it rained. It was a gentle, beautiful spring rain that tapped softly against the glass ceiling of the conservatory. I walked down the aisle surrounded by 80 people who genuinely loved us. There were no plexiglass dance floors, no screaming planners, and no toxic family members. And sitting in the front row, right next to Brendan's parents, was Mr. Arthur Pendleton, smiling as we finally said our vows. Can you believe the absolute pure justice of Mr. Pendleton, bringing the police and his lawyer to confront the golden child and her entourage? Hannah finally got the beautiful, drama-free wedding she deserved, while her mother faced the legal consequences of her own toxic favoritism. If you loved this story of an entitled family getting exactly what they bargained for, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more insane real-life drama.